So now we're going to talk about a couple of different examples of using semaphores, starting with one example that shows how to use the semaphore to mediate access to shared resources. This is basically a quick synopsis of the Palantir Manager program. And I was able to find Lego Lord of the Rings characters to illustrate and animate my example. So this is our Android app where we've got Palantir and a semaphore, and then the beings that want to gaze are implemented by separate threads. Let's say we're going to start out where we've got a count of 2. Probably should have made that count of 3 because there's 3 of them on the screen. But in this case, let's say the count is 2. So we've got 2 of these things. And why might we do this? Let's say I have a quad-core system, but I don't want to use all the cores on the system for my Palantir app. I want to leave some available for other things. So I might say only 2 at a time. So what's going to happen here, much like the Grateful Dead wine example, you have to acquire the permit from the semaphore before a being can gaze. So let's say, I think that's probably Gandalf the White, if I'm not mistaken. He wants to gaze into the semaphore, into the Palantir. So he goes down, the semaphore count's greater than 0. He gets a Palantir, the count's decremented by 1. He can start to gaze. Now along comes, I think that's Sauron. He wants to gaze too. He gazes a lot. And so he comes along, the count's greater than 0. He gets a Palantir, the count goes to 0. By the way, here's a question for you. How did Sauron gaze into the Palantir? Did he have like an orc standing down there like holding it for him? Since he was just a giant eye, right? You should ask yourself that question. It's very important. So then some other being comes along, maybe Frodo or Boromir or Aragorn or whatnot, and they want to gaze, but all the Palantir are in use at this point, so the semaphore count's 0, so they're going to have to block. They can't make any progress. When one of the beings is done, say Gandalf, he puts it back into the pool of Palantir, and the count goes to 1. And that means somebody else can wake up and grab it. One of the other beings, like Merry or Pippin or Frodo or whatnot. This particular example shows fully bracketing of acquisition and release of semaphores. The thread or the being that acquires the semaphore must be the one to release it. Here's another view of this. This is more of a what's called a UML sequence diagram view, where we show the Palantir manager, a given Palantir, all of our being runnables, and the sort of the GUI over here. So the way this works is the GUI starts up a thread, and then that thread starts up a bunch of other threads. This is what your program did in assignment 1A, of course. They go ahead and run, so the run hook method on each of these things is called, and then they go out and they acquire or try to acquire Palantir from the Palantir manager. They each call acquire. Let's say the value is 2. So these 2 guys get a Palantir. This one has to block and wait. They then take their Palantir, each one of them, and they gaze into it. This guy gazes in, this guy gazes in. They're running in separate threads. They can run independently and concurrently. This guy's still blocked on acquire. At some point, one or both of these guys will release the Palantir after they're done gazing. At that point, this guy can acquire it, and that being can then gaze into the Palantir. So hopefully that gives you, again, sort of a mental view of what's happening. And these different perspectives are really important, because if you just look at the source code, you don't see the concurrent operations unless you can kind of visualize it in your head. So in my experience, being able to see these things and show them diagrammatically through UML diagrams or some other visualization technique really helps to kind of pull all the pieces together. Okay, so that's the overview of using a semaphore to mediate access to shared resources.